When you watched the videos of last summer's riots, what did you see? Hatred and racism?
Let's have it!
A violent, extreme expression of concern some may quietly share about the state of the country.
In this country, it's every person's right, I believe, to feel safe. I think that humanity just got lost last summer.
The violence was sparked by the horrific Southport murders, but for how long had that anger been brewing? So where does it come from, and could we see it erupt again? I'm Daniel Hewitt, and this is what you need to know. Joining me is ITV's Sabet Choudhury, who's been investigating the fallout of the riots in a new film called Disunited Kingdom, Are We a Nation Divided? Seb, thank you so much for joining us. I spent a little bit of time last summer after the incident in Southport in Tamworth, a town with an asylum hotel and riots that happened there. And I found it a fascinating couple of weeks getting under the skin of why a town, a quiet market town in the West Midlands, would riot. That's exactly what you've been doing elsewhere, haven't you?
Yeah, for me it was Bristol. I saw it over there and nearby as well in Plymouth in the southwest. For me, I wanted to find out a month after how people from minority groups felt, because I think, like you said, a lot of people didn't want to talk about it, would rather prefer it never happened, of course. But I wanted to see the fear that was left. And what I heard was really quite disturbing, because people were saying to me, especially the Senegalese community in a part of Bristol, which is very multicultural, they were saying that they didn't feel like it was home anymore. The younger children were talking about going out in pairs because they thought they would be attacked. It was almost like a green light for people to come and abuse them. And they were seeing incidents of abuse going up, something that they'd not experienced before. For me as well, my father said to me something. He's a retired surgeon, a fearless guy. He said, I'm kind of worried about going out. And he kept on checking up on me as well, which made me question, am I safe? So that made me think, what was the actual factors behind this? So why not look at it? And that's what led me down this road.
In your life, you said that made me think, am I safe? Have you felt like that before in your life?
I wrote about this in the Inside piece for the ITV website, that even the most securest of person of colour, when you view images like we saw of, in some places quite clearly right-wing groups there, people targeting hotels, daubed graffiti, "Get out of England," which was actually in Tamworth, which you've seen. Sometimes you do feel like prey, and that can be quite an intense feeling. And that's what I was seeing within the Senegalese community. So it's quite a thing to process. And for me as a journalist, as you will know as well, that the way to process it is to dig deeper.
You've spoken to lots of people for this programme. From, I suppose the phrase was all sides. That feels like the wrong phrase, sides, because we shouldn't be on sides of anything here. But people who clearly have expressed some things that lots of people, including probably the two of us, find deeply uncomfortable. But I think it's important as journalists, isn't it, to go out and find out what people are thinking. Clearly, what happened last summer happened for reasons, whether you agree with them or not. And for this film, you have gone and confronted some of those people, including a man called Dan Locke. Tell me about him.
Dan Locke is interesting. Dan Locke is a tradesman from an area in Bristol, South Bristol. We met him after he served 6 months in prison for his actions in the protests in Bristol outside a hotel. He got into a couple of altercations. He said to me, because he was called a Nazi, and he retaliated. And he said to me, "Why am I a Nazi? Because I'm white, I'm bald, I've got tattoos." So to him, it was not because he's a racist, it was because of the way he was perceived. And he, though, firmly believes in what he says are stop the boats He called them the Stop the Boats protest. He regrets his actions while he was down there, but he doesn't regret going down there.
I do firmly believe in Stop the Boats. I feel like we are being overrun. So I did go down there, not out of anger. Like I said, I've never been arrested before in my life. I went down there just to voice my opinion.
Do you regret it?
I regret what I've done. I don't regret going down there. I regret what I'd done when I was down there. But I do believe if you believe in something, you've got the right to protest. There was some people that were down there to specifically cause trouble. There's no doubt about that. But you can't brandish everyone just because people are walking around with an England flag. You can't brandish them all racist and far right.
Dan is an interesting person. Dan actually talked about illegal immigrants as well. And it's worth noting that, a person is only illegal. You're okay to come into this country, and they're only illegal once their asylum claim has been rejected and they continue to remain here. I think it's rhetoric like that which needs to be, kind of spread out by us as well, that people may be getting wrong.
How much do you think misinformation played a role in this? And by misinformation, I that covers a large area here, because there's the reason people come over, there is the way they are accommodated, the conditions they are accommodated in. In Tamworth, for my example, the Holiday Inn was where a lot of asylum seekers had been placed, and the Holiday Inn was probably the biggest and probably the nicest hotel in Tamworth. It was next door to the Snowdome, which is where lots of people took their children for parties, and the Holiday Inn was seen as a nice local hotel that people would use. And suddenly it was closed almost overnight with no consultation, no warning, and then asylum seekers were placed in it. And that caused a lot of anger. That isn't misinformation, that is what happened. But from that kind of vacuum, it gets filled, I felt, with bad actors. How much do you think misinformation, that kind of story that played out in Tamworth, was happening where you were and across the country?
I think greatly. In most places, it's in the days of sort of social media. I think it's the truths behind this issue. It's hard to tell where they end and where the actual misinformation starts.
Yeah,
the line is very, very thin, and it's down to people like us to kind of get that message out there. When you speak of Tamworth, we spoke to one of the people who was in the hotel. A guy called Eric, and he talked about the fear that he had as the rioters came in. And in this country, it's every person's right, I believe, to feel safe.
Of course, yeah.
And I think that humanity just got lost last summer, and it felt like these people were just seen as a problem. And when you hear Eric's story, we spoke to him. We've got a clip by him as well, haven't we?
Let's listen to Eric, yeah.
Of course, I was scared. I was scared in case when they're gonna come in, we're gonna get killed or something. Pray for my life, pray for whole hotel as well. Yeah, I've been encourage people to pray. Tell people, pray. If you Muslims, pray. If you Christian, pray. You need to pray. We need help from God, as we can't do nothing.
Eric's story is incredible because he escaped the Democratic Republic of Congo as a teenager during the Civil War. His parents, as he tells me, were slaughtered, and he ran into hiding. And he came to this country. He's still being processed 15 years later. Can you believe that? 15 years, and he's still waiting. So he can't get a job. And he's trying to be helped, to get a little bit of education as well. But the fear that he still lives under, that's what really struck me about him.
I get the sense that there's the anger and the kind of violence and extremism that spilled over last summer. It was directed at these hotels in towns because it was almost like where people could go. But listening to you and listening to Eric and listening to what Dan Locke was saying, the anger's directed at the wrong people here, isn't it? If you believe, rightly or wrongly, that immigration is too high, the anger should not be at the people who are coming here for a better life. The anger should not be here at people trying to return to a safe place or to legally arrive here as economic migrants. If you believe immigration is too high, the anger should be directed at the government. It should be directed at institutions. It feels to me that last summer the anger was directed at people, and as you say, they were sort of dehumanised. There's the sense of unfairness here when you hear from Eric and you think, well, why were you angry at Eric? Eric's been going through the asylum system for over a decade. That's not Eric's fault. That's the fault of the government not having a proper asylum system.
Yeah, and I think that's the bit that needs to be addressed. Part of a lot of this is, like you say, the rhetoric has been very divisive. In fact, last week in Bristol, we had another sort of an anti-immigration protest, albeit small, albeit largely peaceful. I was down there, and what I noticed was the anger from both sides. It's very, very tense at the moment. It's a very tense situation because I think the messaging is not out there. The deeper rooted problems haven't been addressed. I mean, that's one of the things that we really tried to look into in this program. What is the problem? And speaking to a lot of the experts, you realize that this is years of people feeling like they've been left behind, communities feeling left behind, and then being right picking for, as you say, bad actors, and being fed misinformation, which then turns people like Eric into dehumanized people.
And on that misinformation, we spoke about it briefly before, there is work to be done, and I think the reason why your film is so important is because we have to. I think we have a responsibility as journalists to break down some of the feelings that people have. Again, in Tamworth, this view of the hotel, there's a view of what life in the hotel is like. There is a view of how much money they are receiving as asylum seekers. There's also the view that they come over here and they get a hotel and they don't work. They're not allowed to work. I mean, that's the one. I said that to so many people, and they said they come over here and they're not working. You're like, well, that's not their fault.
We are in a situation where I think people who come over are seen as freeloaders, and people who want to control our borders are seen as racists. That is a very dangerous place to be. And we as journalists need to play our part to try and tell the story from both sides fairly. And as for the government, they need to really look at what are the issues, what are the problems within the communities that are making them feel this way, and what are the messaging that they're doing that they're getting wrong. We spoke to a former government advisor, Dame Sarah Khan, who had signalled these problems would happen in the past, and she had this to say.
I think we will see all kinds of divisive activity occurring both online and offline. I think we will see growing levels of violence because I think we are living in very challenging times now. I mean, the cost of living crisis, the levels of disillusionment and distrust people have with state institutions and with democracy, distrust of police, the levels of deprivation that people are experiencing. I think these are really challenging and difficult times.
Well, the list is quite scary, isn't it?
I was writing them down. As I was listening, I was thinking, right, that's quite a good point. And then I ended up not bothering because she said so many interesting things there.
I mean, she does go on to say that what does give her hope is that we have this British bulldog spirit. And one of the great things that we did see in those protests last year were the amount of people that came out against it.
Yeah.
And we have to kind of hope that, it doesn't happen again. Dan Locke said to me, the protester in Bristol, that he would never go down again. The prison sentences were so harsh. The system was so quick. It may be enough. But we mustn't forget people's feeling towards this. The right to protest is there. And people will engage that if they feel the need to. The government have told us that the violence that spilled out onto our streets last year was inexcusable, and communities are still feeling the impact now. Adding that we've seen years of decline and underinvestment in our communities, public services decimated, and governments who have eroded the trust of the British people they were elected to serve.
Seb, it's honestly a fascinating chat with you. I could chat to you all day about this, and I'm sure we'll chat about it offline. Thank you very much. Seb, his film, which you should watch, A Disunited Kingdom on ITVX. If you're listening to this on a podcast platform, we'll put a link in the show notes so you can click on that. While you're there, you have to subscribe to What You Need to Know. It makes no sense not to, and it means you'll never miss an episode. Imagine that. And remember, you can watch full episodes on Spotify, YouTube, and ITVX. But until next time, from me and Seb, thank you very much for watching and for listening.